Okay, good morning. It's really great to be here back in Kosovo again, and especially since it's always, at the moment, you never quite know whether you're going to be allowed across borders, so it's really brilliant to be here in person and to welcome the panelists. Can you hear okay? Yeah. Yes, so the panel today, a discussion on knowledge, art and language, and also in the context of the bigger themes of the festival, which is about art and cancel culture. And so we'll be discussing the idea of knowledge, art and language, and looking at the kind of Western methodologies and the dominant kind of themes around that, and how artists and writers from a more diverse international background can start to play with that and break that apart. And I'll be interested to hear what the panelists have to say on that. But also artists, who has a platform, who can tell us what to write, what to say, and what our responsibility is in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of artistic expression. My name is Sarah Heher. I'm based in the UK, and I'm a writer mostly for TV, radio, stage, and poetry as well. And I'd like to introduce the panelists. We'll start with Arlette-Louise, who is first time in Kosovo, and so really happy to welcome you here. She is a philosopher, fiction writer, curator, and researches Pan-African sciences and their forms of mediation. I'm really interested as well in the way that you use text with sound, and there's been experimenting with how that works, and through audio and your radio. Saviza, yeah, and how that gives a voice to the oppressed. She's working particularly in Rwanda, but across African cultures as well. So welcome. Adela. Adela is an artist, curator, writer and producer as well, and it's really interesting that on the panel we have a lot of the panelists work across mediums and work in quite a collaborative way. She was the founding director and is still the director for the Tirana Art Lab Centre for Contemporary Art. She lives between Tirana in Albania and in Frankfurt, and writes poetry both as a personal way of exploring and realising almost poetic diaries of life, but also in a deeper philosophical way about humans and purpose and what we are as humans. That'd be fair. The meaning, yeah. And works across sound, video, photography and other mediums. I'd like to introduce Genc, who is widely known as a poet, but also interested in philosophy and also photography. And he won the International Photography Prize, the John Mill Prize for Photography. Again, I was interested when we're going to talk about language in that idea of writing in Albanian and English, and that the translation of that is part of the process and part of the art form, and I'd be interested to hear more about that. His exhibit has been published and exhibited across the world. And last but not least, Etrit, who is a poet, performance poet, but also has an interest and is involved in politics. And I heard the poem last night, which was very funny, but also, of course, deeply political. And yeah, really keen to hear. Living in Switzerland, with his father is Albanian as well. So, and it's your first time in Kosovo too?
No, it's about my third time. My first time performing.
First time performing in Kosovo, so it's great to see you here. And again, the kind of working across with the politics, the poetry, and the performance. Interesting work, how that works as well.
Thank you so much for turning the pretentious crap that I handed in as a bio into something actually reasonable. Yes.
So, I'd like to get started with, sorry. Okay, Arlette-Louise, I'd like to get started. Would you like to talk a little bit more about how, what you do in terms of working across mediums and the way that you think that's important to get meaning across, and what are the meanings that you want to get across in art, and how working across those different mediums helps? Yes. I think.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm not so sure because I'm not a shouter, and so I hope you can hear me well.
It's getting through.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you first for the invitation. Yesterday I forgot to say thank you to the ones who organize that festival to, bring across very important angles on perceptions. Also, mostly thank you to Eli Krasniqi and Demetja that I got to be in touch initially. Thank you for the question. I think meaning is everywhere. It is about how we get open towards it. And then there's a question on how we express it. So I think the fact that I have not been drawn into limitations comes from the fact that I feel that limitations are a way to set an orientation and to already direct someone into one way to perceive things. And I'd like to remain open because there's so many spots that I cannot see from the fact that I'm an organic being, and that I feel the influence towards the visibility, towards the external factors have been so oppressive that I'd like to more go into what I cannot see. So not that focus on the eye, but also what is in my back, what is frequency. And so many frequencies we cannot perceive, but they are there. And that's how I got so inspired. And maybe it's also just a way that some beings are more receptive to certain media. For me, it has always been the sound.
The audio, yeah.
Yes.
And for you, is that something that's very personal and an individual exploration, or is it important for you to work with others in that exploration? Or does that start to limit? Does that become a limitation itself? Is it an individual journey?
Mm-hmm. So you mean with others in terms of other beings, other people?
Other people in terms of either community, non-artists, or other artists, other practitioners?
Yes, both are always important to me. When I started to be very much interested in music, I wanted to get a touch of that instrument that was so inspiring to me, the guitar. And then I was always seeking to be in a band, to listen to how we are all receiving certain frequencies and how we express them. So both were always interested. And now in the artistic work, when we talk, for instance, about Civic Contemporary, an art space that was founded in 2009 in Berlin by my colleague Bonaventure Sobejeng-Dikum, and that is now, we are now a team of over 20 members, all into different directions, if it's art, science, or even the ones that some people would not think about in the arts world. So that for me is very important, to always look at what I don't know. As I could refer to the Fulani people in West Africa who have a saying, if you know that you don't know, you will know.
Right.
And then I got to think about Plato, that is so much quoted on, I know that I don't know. And we know that what is called philosophy today has been so much oppressed by the way that the philosophers of the so-called Enlightenment, how they wanted to be attached to an identity, and they refer to as their ancestors to the Greeks, but the Greeks have lived in Africa, and they have been taught by African priestesses and priests, and so that way to perceive on who is the one who set the parameters or who set the perception directions is not the human. It's the that was what is a certain law of the universe, of the cosmos. So that's something that I want to go more into.
That's really interesting. And looking for what you don't know. So to come across to you, you also kind of interdisciplinary. It's really important to you that you work with different mediums. How do you use those to explore? Is that important to you to look for what you don't know? And how do you use them to explore outside of that kind of sphere of influence that you kind of absorb as you're growing up within a culture?
Yeah. Well, I think of interdisciplinarity as something that you don't really choose. It actually comes with your practice, and the more you kind of grow, the more you add things and layers to your practice. And as you mentioned, I describe myself now, like for this occasion, as an artist, curator, producer, and writer, and those are all things that I'm basically doing. And at the same time, I'm acting as a director of a non-profit institution, independent art institution, and as a person. No? And between this personal and the public, there is so much going on, and there are so many layers in between. That is something that you cannot erase in the moment when you make an appearance somewhere. You basically bring all those things with you. But what I found interesting about the discussion of today about knowledge, art, and language, I've been thinking about them, and I basically think about that. And when you introduced me, and you said about me writing poetry, I said I write about purpose and meaning. So when thinking about knowledge, immediately I had to go further and think of meaning. Because, like, even thinking of my practice as a curator and basically asking, what is that? Like, what does it mean to curate? And what does it mean to be a curator? I came to realize through my research and my practice that what a curator is basically doing is dealing with meaning, and which is different from knowledge, because knowledge is more related to science and to methodology and to everything that is perceived through the senses, and meaning basically goes beyond that, no? And the curator as well, it is in this position of mediator, and it can be a curator, it can be an editor, it can be the director of a festival, but we are all in this middle point where we have to give an explanation of what is the meaning of what we are presenting, and not what that is, because it's existent, we cannot deny. Everybody can do art and express themselves, but we try, or we choose to present certain things and other things to leave out. And in that sense, the question of meaning becomes very relevant. And I think meaning always brings you toward a certain openness. And it's not only a reference to something else which maybe remains only on the basis of aesthetics. And being in this, now we are in this literature context, but usually I'm more in the art context. And it's interesting because in the art context we talk a lot about poetics.
Right, yeah.
Yeah? And we try to think and elaborate about that, and about the discussion between poetics and aesthetics. No? What's the difference between that, and where do they meet, and how can we go beyond that?
That's interesting, yes.
So basically, I think what I'm looking for in my practice is something that starts with aesthetics, that does not neglect aesthetics or knowledge, or what is visible, but it does not only brings you or refers you just to something else, which is basically aesthetical, visible, or fact, but it brings you into a wider context. And that wider context has a direction, in my understanding, and it's always forward and upward.
Right, yeah. Okay.
This is a little bit in terms of...
No, that's really interesting. We'll, I think, come back and explore that further. I'm going to go to Etrit. Yeah, like I said, a lot of the panelists...
I doubt I'll need that one, or will I?
Are we all
okay,
right?
all right, cool.
This idea of artists calling themselves curators or, writers, poets, more and more, I suppose, in order to get a platform and to control the meaning that they want to put over, is it a way of avoiding the kind of gatekeepers and giving platform to artists who are prepared to kind of step out of the cultural norms? And you didn't describe yourself as a curator.
No,
and
well...
you talked about, last night you talked about being invited to places. And I just, I was interested in how you feel about that. The platforms you're given, the spaces you're given to impart your knowledge or meaning.
I suppose the slam scene is a very specific one in that case. Like most of us who are active in that are at the same time writers, are curators, we organize events, we moderate, we are very tightly knit in that sense. Yes, absolutely. And the specific scene for Switzerland was very different from what happened with slam poetry in the US, where it drew from decades or even centuries old traditions that came from the African American community, from the Latino community, from the Arabic community. In Switzerland, when we started this in the late 90s, it was basically just people coming from other art forms looking for a new format.
It wasn't coming from a tradition of an oral culture of
absolutely not. Absolutely not. Maybe I have to mention that for Swiss people, the whole idea of orality is a very different one as well, because our written language is not the same one as our spoken language. What we call Schweizerdeutsch, which is our spoken language in the German part, is something that is completely incomprehensible to any other German speaker. But when we do write, we write in traditional German. So we already have a discrepancy between spoken and written language. And it was really, if you will, a sort of circus format where you had people coming from the visual arts, people coming from rock music, from rap music, people coming from traditional poetry. I personally came from traditional poetry and found most readings so incredibly boring that I felt there needs to be a format where you can actually make poetry come alive. I stumbled across slam, and that was that. And we have this term that we use it's called slammily. It's very slammily, very cheesy. That says at the same time we actually consider ourselves a family that includes not only the people on stage, but also the people in the audience, the people who work, the technicians, the people working the bar, the people working at the cash register. And it's a very tightly knit community. I have to admit, I don't have any friends outside of the scene anymore.
Right, okay. And how does that play in with your politics and the idea? My understanding of slam poetry is that, well, this is what I thought, is that it tends to be counterculture, it tends to be quite rebellious. And we can talk more later about cancel culture and the idea of what can and can't be said. But then your other foot is in a more establishment world. And I mean, I don't know enough about how you interact within that world, but how do the two play together? And is that a useful kind of, one foot in both
Absolutely
worlds?
Yes, and absolutely no. I have to say that I was elected in St. Gallen quite surprisingly, both to me and especially to my party. It had a bit to do with, look at me. I'm not a typical Swiss person. I was, in German we say ein bunter Hund. So someone you will recognize whether you know him or not. That helped in getting me elected, and neither the parliament nor my party really knew what I was going to bring into this, if I was just a madman in there. But I come from a very political background. My mother was a journalist. I do have a certain tendency to use what I know from stage in politics as well, and in politics, yes, language is a weapon. If you know how to use it, it can be very hurtful, but it can be very effective as well. But basically, yes, my strategy in politics sometimes was the very same one I used last night. You make people laugh for about 3 minutes, after that they trust you, and then you can really hit them in the face with the truth. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't.
Brilliant, thank you. There's lots as well that I want to come and kind of delve more into over time, but I'm going to Genc. Okay, so to come to Genc, I think in this context of, we're talking about Western kind of methodologies and ideas and how they can easily dominate the cultural language, and yet we're in Kosovo speaking in English, so I'm very aware of kind of your idea, Genc, on language and meaning and how you convey meaning, because you write both in English and Albanian, but also you use the visual language of photography and art. How do you convey meaning through them? What's important to you? Where are the challenges and the barriers? And the opportunities?
Right. Okay, thank you for having me here, and it was really nice to hear everyone else say a few words on knowledge, arts, meaning, and politics, and etc. I've been recently quite often asked myself, what am I really doing when I'm putting together things, objects, words, and is it knowledge, that thing that I am producing via verse, images, and juxtaposing things and objects in general. The answer has been negative, that I am not really producing knowledge. What I'm producing is something which is beyond knowledge, or an impossibility of knowledge that stops at perception, but also it's where it draws its power, and what makes it really important for us humans. And I've come also to another conclusion with that, which is that I use knowledge, and probably many artists, I shouldn't hasten and say all the artists, use knowledge as material to create art and meaning. Although for me meaning is already a form of knowledge, and meaning to me is closer to science, and non-meaning is closer to arts. I would say cognition instead of meaning. Or perception. You perceive something. You get it via your intuition or instinct. Something which is much faster than meaning. Something you get with abstract painting, for example. Something which opens up to you, pulls you towards it, and then it shuts again. Like a good poem, for example. So, yeah, I mean, this is what I can say about the relationship between arts and knowledge. I don't believe that there is artistic knowledge. There is knowledge, can be historical knowledge about arts, or scientific knowledge about pigments and wefts and weaves of a canvas, but the artwork itself, the object of art, be it a poem, I'm just using these very common examples, or an abstract painting, it is not knowledge. It is something else.
You're saying something deeper that comes from within, or?
Well, deep or shallow, I don't know, but you cannot really break it down into prose, you can't paraphrase it. If you start paraphrasing an artwork, it means that either the artwork is not good because you can paraphrase it, or that your paraphrasing is not good, or you're talking about art is not good. And to actually pick where, on what Adela was saying about curators and writing and giving meaning to art and art events, and trying, like the struggle of somehow describing works. If we read curatorial texts of artworks, or even literary reviews of certain poetical works, we find a lot of poetry in them. They are poetical as well. And in politics, when you said about the use of language, yeah, it's oratory and it's poetry. It's a way of using words that you move people's hearts. Mm-hmm. And there are many politicians who are into politics, and they campaign, and they somehow they come across as bigger poets than many of poets who work with language and who are artists, and who might actually be better politicians because they might have great ideas about what to do with the world and society and humanity. But then politics and arts, they intersect. I've said a lot, I think.
No, that's great. I know, and I've made notes.
I can say
there's
some
about
more.
10 different questions that like to come from that.
Of course not. But I hope
No, that's
I was
no, it was very
Yeah.
interesting, and again, I hope we've got time. We can come back and unpick some of that
Cool.
more.
Thanks.
From what you've said, there's various different things I'd like us to talk about, and please feel free to discuss between yourselves as well. In fact, I'm going to start with something when we're talking about philosophy and, the artistic imperative and the desire to make things and to change things and to express yourself, I'm going to actually come down to something quite base, which is funding and platforms. And when you said it's hard to describe an art, and I know you were talking in a more philosophical way, but as artists, unless the countries you're working in are very different from the UK, you're constantly having to find ways of getting a platform. So what I'd like to talk about is that important to you as an artist, or can you just create in a space that's for yourself or for your family or for a very small community? Or is it important to get the platform, and is that for recognition? Is it for economic reasons? Is it to change the world? Is it to, change a community? So do you need the funding and the platform to do that? Is that important, or is that actually itself the idea of getting recognition? Is that quite a Western idea, that actually art can be something that is a process rather than a product? And is it by having to find a space for yourself and to get funding and to get money and to find an audience, does that limit what you can do experimentally? I mean, you're all artists who are experimenting with form and meaning, as far as I can see. Is that clear? So do you need a platform? Do you seek out a voice, and why is that? And an audience and recognition? And if so, how do you do that, and how does it limit you? That's quite a lot of questions. I'll come to Etrit first.
It's probably the easiest for me to answer because my art form depends on an audience. So yeah, pretty easy to answer. No, I cannot write just for myself. I was thinking just a second ago, I don't know if you've heard about this, I've only recently discovered this. Apparently there are people who have a verbal inner monologue and there are people who don't. I am one of those who does not. I do not hear my thoughts. So I only hear myself think when I hear myself speak.
And that surprises me, because last night the way that you speak has an almost inner verbal monologue about it, but it has to be
It
heard.
has to be expressed,
Yeah.
It has to be expressed. And I sometimes babble along while I'm tapping into my computer. It's impossible to write in public places, for example, because people just think either I'm crazy or they think I'm on the phone. So, I use headphones so people think I'm on the phone. That works. But so yeah, no, I do need an audience, and of course, slam poetry is always also oriented towards an audience. You try to predict what sort of people will be there, what allusions, what jokes will they understand, and then you change the text accordingly. This, in a sense, is prostitution as well, if you will, or artistic compromise. But at the same time, it hones your craft in working in the moment. Does that limit me in the sort of things that I can do on stage? Sure it does. I'm a big fan of fantasy and science fiction literature, and I would love to one day write a great fantasy novel of the 21st century, which will probably never happen because I don't get around to it.
And Arlette talked about limitations and it being important to remove those limitations and to be able to work beyond that. I think, if I'm understanding what you said, you're working within, we're all having to push against limitations as artists, but slam is quite counterculture anyway, but do you find the limitations help you to work as an artist, or is it something that you're constantly pushing against?
Both. Look, I mentioned the term prostitution, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a joke. The specific situation of the slam scene in Switzerland and Germany, and that is very different from the rest in the world. I realize the privilege is that we can actually make enough money with doing that to live off, and easily. I made far above the average amount of what an artist makes in Switzerland. I don't know if you want to talk about money, but we do in Switzerland, and maybe that is one of the reasons for it. It's an economical thing as well.
The economical thing, and the idea that I called it kind of base, that you get down to that financial thing, but it's, when we're looking at a diversity and you're looking at patriarchy and racism, and actually the funding is an important part of it. Where are the gatekeepers? Who is getting to put their artwork out there, and in what kind of way? And without funding, sometimes that in itself is a limitation, and maybe that doesn't matter. Can I come to you, Arlette, to ask, kind of, when you are seeking this knowledge that you don't know, or looking and pushing at boundaries and bringing people together, or exploring some new idea, how does that work, and how do you start to get an audience for it? You've got your radio. Is that something that you have to look for funding for, and does that affect content and how you structure that?
If I may, I would like to respond to your
to the
previous
other question.
question.
Yes, please do.
The platform, and really there are so many very profound impressions that I got to listen to from Genc, Adela, and Etrit, that I think one thing that I take out of that, which, all of them go into specific directions, but there's one thing about the meaning, and that what goes beyond that what we can catch, maybe, that we can have as a matter. So the thing beyond the matter is what I would say is not a limitation, but more focalization. So how to open the senses, because we are matter and also immaterial, and how to not try to close off the matter and all the senses, because we are with these both sides operating or going through space, but how to come into a balance of both through introspection, so that I would say the element of a platform is more focalization. Where do I look to?
Yeah.
So also as a mediator in the arts, going into more what also meditation is about. You know, if you think of someone, of something specifically, you are out to really get connected through the frequencies, through the electric field and magnetic field. And this is what, when we talk with our colleagues, we have really in our consciousness. So knowledge in terms of science and consciousness, so all the science combined. And on Savizar, we talk specifically about that platform, which we more refer to as a ritual, as a circle.
Yeah.
So a form of a circle that is not closing, but it's actually more going into the depth, so inside, which is also on purpose sonic. It comes from the tradition of the Zar ritual in Pan-African cultures, Pan-African sciences, which is a way to open up a person that is possessed by spirits that they find difficult to respond to, that are sometimes kept within that, but they know that these spirits have chosen them, have been looking towards them as a potential to speak the non-visible. And this ritual goes into this trance process. So trance as also the process you mentioned, it's not about the product.
Not just about product, it's actually,
not about the audience, not about how many people we reach, but really how deep it can go. And so we have artists like Nkisi, who is really drawn to Congolese Bantu cosmology, namely from one author, Fukiao, who talks about hearing is seeing, and seeing is reacting. And so we have her, and when you listen to her, you wouldn't think of, okay, this is philosophy, but this is philosophy, this is science. This is what we want to put more into the focalization. We have also Urban Farrell, who had some episodes, one on Iraqi female, where you have different voices from the streets, from children, and then you have women who come with certain mantras, singings. Just to name a few on what that platform, which I would more say ritual, is about.
Yeah, for me that's extremely interesting, because it just, as an artist in the UK, you think about connecting with people and finding finding a space to be able to share your work, and you immediately think of filling in a form. So this idea of being able to kind of meditate and connect and use completely different ways to begin a process and to keep that process moving and to connect with people is fascinating and mind-blowing too. Yeah. Adela, can I come to you? So you're working in Albania and in Germany, and as a creator and curator, and coming back to the question I was asking about platforms and voice, and bringing in the idea of how that might limit your freedom, and how those limitations, you work with them or work in spite of them. Just tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm working in different contexts when I'm working in Germany or in Albania, and maybe so are we all when we change places. And in that sense, I think it's relevant to think about that core issues of this discussion about knowledge and maybe Western-centered knowledge or meaning production, and how that is relevant in another part of, not near the center, in the periphery, no? And I can talk about Albania because I think in Germany I have a different role and I have to adapt to that, and I'm conscious about that. And as I said, some things You don't choose. It comes with you. So in Albania, for example, and I think it's similar here in Kosovo too, we as producers, as people working in the arts, we have to create structures because they are non-existent. And when doing that, we are entering, in my opinion, the fields of politics. No? And we face as well, at least in our realities, politics becoming more a matter of aesthetics or language, without structures, without programs, without platforms, without laws, without long-term programs. No? And that's what we are suffering from in arts. No? So we have to do that work too, to ensure the artistic, the poetic, to be further developed. I have to admit, though, that sometimes we are really working with small communities, no? But I've come to realize that even that it's important, like to make an artist, to give them the possibility to experience their own self, their own work, their own production, their own creativity within a certain context. It's already doing a lot, because often it's we want art to change society, no? And that's so big, and it's always, we talk about we and them and this, and we forget that it all starts actually in that very individualistic.
Yeah.
So I think at least, you know, even, I mean, I've come to realize, although my institution is doing a good job internationally, I've come to realize that just supporting one single person, one single artist to do their job, it's already a lot. What comes out of that, of course, we take care of that too. But, you know, just to ensure that small community of artists to live and to create outside of traumatic experiences and limitations, it's already a lot. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, we can't see, I mean, language, poetry cannot be separate, because language is a construction. It is nothing without what comes before and after it. Yeah. So it is not a separated entity. So it always comes with thinking, at least I hope, and with acting, no? And those three things are kind of the core, at least of my practice, and at least of the practice of here, of Polip and of Qendra Multimedia, because we see what these guys are doing. They are doing the festival, there are people here performing, they have structures, they have other plays, so it goes hand in hand. It cannot be separated. I can say as well that we have to do a lot in our contexts, because we have to be both maybe creators of things related to meaning and things related to structures. Yeah. But I mean, that's our reality. And maybe in Germany, in Switzerland, or in other more Western contexts, we have, at least, I don't know, we have to deal with deconstruction of structures, which is like the opposite direction, no? Because everything is already so structuralized, so politicized, so going through layers of control, bureaucracy, that you have to work totally the other way.
That's so interesting, that because we talked before about you just having a foot in two camps in many different ways, but in terms of that, you're working where structures need to be built in order to share meaning, and then another place where, you have to break down those structures in order to find a space and a place for art that maybe isn't the dominant kind of art form.
And I think we are all doing that in different ways. So I know that this discourse of Western-centered, this is a Western discourse too, by the way. Like the Western-centered knowledge is a Western discourse, because at least, I don't know, me and Arlette are the examples of different voices from the periphery being in the Western societies and bringing other ways of approaching and dealing with them. Because when she's talking about sound, about vibration, I mean, that's like a total different way of dealing and acting in the realities where we are at.
Yeah.
No, and I like the idea of talking about sound related to vibration and relating to truth and to meaning, because sound never comes just as sound. It comes with the other layers in it.
And
I don't know if I made anything clear here.
I wonder whether in the musical tradition, even in a Western musical tradition, that's explored more, but not within the context of language and performance in the West. I mean, you see it, that I think audio artists are exploring it, but I don't think it's very dominant within the performance, that idea of not just what we hear, but how we hear it, even in a physical sense, which came across from what you were saying, which is really interesting.
Can I say just the last thing shortly? I think it's time. Our times now are times of empowerment, not anymore of victimhood. At least that happened to us in the 90s, you know, in all this area of Balkanization and exotization. That's over. Now we have second generation of people who got educated, moved outside, have knowledge, and they're going beyond it. So it's the time of empowerment, and we hear more and more voices being in the center and not doing what the center expects them to do, but whatever it's their own vocation.
And on the note of like positive moving forward, particularly to do with Kosovo and films in Kosovo and female-led films, it's fantastic, and we keep seeing, you know, in the UK, people winning awards, but we're not. They still aren't getting a platform. We're not seeing them. The distribution isn't there. So that I think that's interesting, that relationship between art being created, who's creating the art, but who's seeing it, where it's being seen, and building a structure as well that suits the way that artists are working nowadays, and artists not just in the centre, but at the edges, at the periphery, that are kind of moving towards the centre. Genc, the question that I asked everybody was probably quite a long time ago, so do you want to, generally just talking in terms of your artistic practice and the platforms, how you look for platforms, how you work within and without the structure?
Oh, it's friends, really. Friends. Friends are really important if you're an artist. I don't think you can be an artist today without friends who help you with different things.
And do you mean on a personal level or on friends within the artistic kind of community? Yes,
but then the personal and the professional, they intermingle. Yeah. And I'm a bit of I'm not a holist, but I believe in interconnectivity of things. For example, this idea of center and periphery is the idea itself is Western, and it is only possible because we already think that the human mind is here and everything revolves around it, and that we think that the center owns the periphery, that the bacteria, we own the bacteria in our body, which are twice more than our cells. Or when you play with your dog, are you playing with your dog, or is the dog playing with you? So is the periphery having a laugh at the center?
This is why I love being on a panel with poets, the metaphors that you're using there.
And yes, actually metaphor is what gives us this difference, or what puts art in contradiction with science, because it's metaphor, it's hints, it's allusion, it's you say something, but you can't really put your finger on it.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for helping me with the proposition. I was going to use the in it.
Which would have a meaning of its own as well.
I know a cheeky meaning. To come back to the whole idea of having your place as an artist, I came up with this concept. I named it the vacant space, and the vacant space in politics, in arts, is a space already there, like a seat in the parliament, and then it expects an artist in an art world, and there are many candidates, and everyone is promising art, and then those who are best at campaigning might win the hearts of the gallerists, and then maybe never deliver with their promises, as politicians usually do. But then it's the vacant space that precedes the artist. It's not the artist that creates the space. The space is already there, and there are as many seats in a parliament, like 200 seats, you know. If they're taken, and you want to get a seat, you can't get a seat because they're taken. And there's always more political thinkers and artistic creators than there are spaces, it seems. Because there's only a certain number, and then that connects us to the state, institutions, organizations, the market, so there's a limitation, and then you need friends. Like, you need friends to help you with materializing your work, to look at your work, to tell you that your work needs reworking, or it's crap, or it's great, to kind of give you a tap on your shoulder and say, go.
And perhaps it's friends you need rather than an institution to tell you it's crap, because with friends there's trust there, there's a dialogue there, there's the opportunity to turn around and say, I don't care,
but then you have friends. For example, you have friends in institutions.
Yeah, I suppose there's maybe
which is
whether
great
wherever you live,
friends in institutions.
it's great if you do, but who gets that, and is it it's not always through merit. I don't know, certainly in the UK, the people who know people, it tends to still be based on an economic and class kind of system.
I don't believe in meritocracy.
Meritocracy is written here as one of my Western traditions.
I'm not into that.
So what do you believe?
Much.
I mean, in that context, rather than in general.
Well, I think that no matter how much there is space there, and the lack of opportunities that abound, artists will make art, and that's really important. I think it's important to make art or write poetry no matter what the cost.
Yeah, and I think that we see that happens. Artists, in extremely challenging situations will still make art if that means doing it underground or secretly or for no money or at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you have to go to a job. But and
then there's another question. Is art leisure, for example? Is art necessary? Can we imagine a humanity without arts? And or is art very, very essential for the spiritual well-being and existence of the human being, which I also believe. And then institutions just fade away. spaces fade away, galleries fade away, because art is also a nourishment for the artist and for people that gather around works of art. Because, and this is the last note, I'll just add this, that I don't believe in art without humans either. And I believe that the artwork is not an artwork without the factor of the
audience,
of the public,
one who
of the
experiences
audience.
it.
Yes, and then you have this sort of a compound, this sort of a combination. You and the painting, you and the poem, you and the movie, and that's the artwork together.
Yeah, and I think
so then the painting it's only an ingredient to the artwork itself, to which you are also an ingredient, and then everything can be an ingredient for arts. People can be ingredients, artists can be artworks, curators then become artists most of the time, and then
what you're saying about the art will be made anyway, that we're humans and we'll make art and the institutions will fade away. But I think it's an interesting point to think about. For example, in Ireland, artists don't pay taxes. They don't pay income tax. So as a government, they decided that art was important enough, and that includes poetry and musicians and visual artists and writers, that there was an understanding that a support from a government level, whereas at the moment, certainly in the UK with the government that we have, money is being withdrawn from the arts, and not just at a kind of at a level of in schools as well and in communities. And one of the things that I was thinking about that space, the space where art is made, I mean, children create art in a school playground. Some of the more, if we're going to talk about carrying on with the kind of centre and diversity, some of the more radical kind of art I've seen created in schools and in small villages that are remote from the idea of any of the forms and structures that are accepted or that are part of the canon. I mean, where time's going on, so I was interested in what you said about the vacant space. And I just wanted to come to each of you to ask you, given complete artistic freedom, and I'll start with you, Etrit, what would you fill the vacant space with? And I've given you no time to think
You've
about
given
that,
me no time to prepare whatsoever, but I'm just
You don't have an internal monologue anyway,
that's cool.
so
I'm going to do what I usually do,
loud.
and I'm just going to babble. So I had never heard about this, and I find it very interesting. So Amazon and artists don't pay taxes in Ireland. This is great.
Yeah, well, I don't think Bono does.
This is
you
fucking
two
brilliant.
don't have to pay tax.
To be honest, and speaking both as a politician and as a functionary for artists in Switzerland, I think that most artists will probably be able to prefer to be able to make enough money to be able to pay taxes than not having to pay taxes, but that's a different story. So if I had complete artistic freedom, I'd probably do completely self-pleasing and self-sufficient stuff. I mentioned the great fantasy novel of the 21st century that probably no one will have any interest in, but to me it would completely satisfy me to write it. But it's a very egoistic perspective, I have to admit that.
So
but that is
you'd
probably
write
what
the
I
great
would do.
21st century fantasy novel with no limitations.
Yeah.
Without being
I
cancelled.
just do stuff that I'd like, probably. So I'm kind of happy that I am in a sort of economic position where I have to earn money and from arts and have to do what I do. Apparently I'm halfway good at it too, so it's okay.
So you're happy not to be asked to step into the vacant space?
I'm a very, very lazy person.
Okay.
I'm a procrastinator of the highest level, and which is the exact opposite of politics, right? In politics, you have to make decision. As artists, you can spend 5 hours thinking about, well, which is the right preposition? Wouldn't it actually be better to say,
in
put my
on.
finger in, because that's actually a more sexual image there.
We can all think about that all afternoon.
I'm very
discuss
sorry.
it in detail. So yeah, great. So we've got the great 21st century sci-fi novel. Arlette.
Oh, I don't know what to say. I lost it a little bit. But
The idea of if the vacant space, if there was a space that could be, there are these spaces that can be filled. If you had artistic freedom, if nothing, you had no limitations in terms of cultural limitations, economic limitations, the limitations of knowledge and thinking and the way that we are expected to present or to create art. What would you put in the vacant space? Obviously, you'd need months to think about it, but even just the kind of concept,
no,
an
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is actually meditation, output meditation. Somebody who teaches meditation, somebody who exercises meditation, because I think not less art is being created, more art is being created. And when more art is being created, then in general we have like overproduction, over-talking, overdoing. We have to undo a lot of things. And if the center periphery think it's a Western construction, the division of the world is Western construction in the first world, second world, third world countries and stuff like that. So we need an advanced language, and that advanced language, it's a more unifying language. And then we come to the cancel culture. There shouldn't be any cancel culture, because it's not a matter of either that or that, but it's a matter of existing in a common understanding. And I think through meditation, through the real practice of meditation, as they do in the Eastern culture, you come maybe to experience more yourself without thinking, because we are even used to know ourselves only as thinkers, in terms of thoughts, and maybe just be there more in terms of existence, just like being, and then maybe you can have more. So I think, meditation is the thing that it can be needed wherever, in politics, in arts, or literature.
And again, this is, my Western brain thinking. Meditation, filling the empty space with meditation, and this idea of stepping back from everything. Is that in and of itself that processes everything that we're not looking for?
No, I think that's the first step.
It's just a step.
Yeah. We
Okay.
cannot give.
We can't,
That's the first
we
step.
can't decide
I think
and
just maybe sometime
just
taking a break,
Yeah.
just like 15, 30 minutes, not staying all day without doing anything, but just creating those spaces, that vacancy where you can be without all of the stuff, and doing that regularly in terms of establishing a practice of being
of reflection
in
and
peace, in reflection,
being,
and knowing yourself without all the things that are being imposed on you, and all the knowledge and everything. And
Actually,
just
and
as a way of reflecting and adding that as an experience to our human experience.
that it's necessary to step back from everything that's layered upon us.
Yeah, all the layers.
From birth,
Yeah.
whichever culture and society you grow up in. I'll come to you because you mentioned meditation, and I don't know if you can build on that, but also again, I think that idea that you said about seeking out what you don't know, and that possibly space, an empty space, has in it the things we don't know. I don't know. What would you feel the vacant space?
I thought so. Empty space. Is there an empty space? I really don't know what to say at this point. I'm just really also processing the very profound perspectives. I don't know.
I think if you were given artistic freedom to do anything, and maybe you already feel like you have artistic freedom to do anything, what would you create if you were told that you could create anything with any number of people or by yourself? Or what would be your dream art creation? Or maybe like Arlette said, it's not that you're creating something solid, or that it's more about having space to think. Or
well, I think I will go back to a discussion that is, I think, too much influence from divisionary perspectives, and infantilizing perspectives of the West and the way they manipulated teachings on spirituality in the politics of Christianity.
Can you
I'm
tell
never
me more
told.
about that, about the infantilizing?
I'm never told to do something.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Who is the authority that tells me, okay, do that or not? Or do I do something because I think someone will be receiving or will look at it at a certain way? So I think that starts there, that there's so much, as Adela said, to undo also, and I think it's really the introspection into how things resonate. So that space, maybe we talk about, I think there are many things that were in my mind when I was listening. I would love to just listen, I would say, and not to occupy these spaces of meaning, but I would talk about how they have been occupied for many centuries. Freedom, for instance. Freedom doesn't mean to do anything. There's one philosopher, Engelbert Beng, who talks about how freedom in Pan-African science and cognition is not about to go around and do whatever you think you should do or you allowed to do or that someone tells you can do, but it is how you are carried by the surrounding so that you can be more in contact with yourself, more in contact with what is beyond what your perceptions give to you, which is the cosmology, the laws of the space, the laws of the cosmos. And then we have language. Language has been occupied as something that is transmitting a communication, but the way we talk now is not because you and I have understood certain words as, okay, we understand what we mean. We understand what we say, but there's more to a word than how we commune from one to the other side. There are all these different layers of what maybe that's what we talk about when we talk about meaning. So we have actually frequencies. You know, in meditation, it's been said that these three vocalizations are related to what is at work in connection. So the A as a causal, the U as the vibration, and the M, where you have the lips together, is the physical. So you touch on that together in the arm, and then you have the mantra, the circle, and at a certain point it reaches you, and that trance. So this transcendence is actually not to go out, but more in. We talked about art, and art has been much occupied by what the Greeks talked about when they say techne, so how you do something with your hands, how you do something on matter. But there's much, science and much acknowledgement on what art meant in the way that you could mediate the forces of the cosmos, how gravity, how you can carry it, so that with what goes down, the way you can level it up and you reach the point, the intersection. So in the intersection is where there is energy coming out. It has been manipulated, so that cross has been manipulated by Romans as the cross of Christianity, which became politics more than spirituality. Because spirituality is not something that someone tells you have to believe or not, but it's your self-recognition. But at the core of it was actually the Ankh, the cross of divine force, so the life force, that energy. So there's that point that when you get more towards it, and I'm not yet, I'm in a process, constant process, but you have the possibilities. It's a constant work to be in the middle, or to move with these waves. So never up or too down, but always like this. And so Ma'at, one of that what came out of these knowledge of priestesses and priests, ma'at, which is a word also of navigation. It's used also in nautic language. So to navigate a boat is actually, there's one Egyptologist, Jan Assmann, who talks about that ma'at is actually art because it is more a way to practice these teachings of the cosmos and to be conscious of the fact that words are frequencies and that you should be mindful of what you say.
Oh, that's, yeah, very interesting. And I'm going to come to Genc. I think on the fact that we're talking here as well about language and that you brought up that idea of freedom as the word, and in cancel culture, what we expect of freedom of speech and our freedom to act and to be able to do things within a society or community in the way that we want, and then taking that onto a much more the level of the cosmos and what it is to connect with that and to be carried by that as a freedom. So in terms of you filling that vacant space, what would you do with it? But also to think about that idea, just as I think with time's drawing to a close, that idea as well about within that space, what does freedom mean to you? Just a quick one to end with. Okay, what would you put in the vacant space?
I don't know. Freedom is a mysterious thing. I don't know if I can easily define freedom, but I'm an individualist. Individualist, not a consumerist individualist, but a individualist as in the 60s, the hippie movement, where you say, where you just say no to authority and you have a mind of your own. I think freedom, well, freedom can mean many things. And vacant space, yeah, that was just a silly idea of mine. Yeah, I meant it in the context of art world, institutions, platforms. Who gets to show? Because
yeah,
you
and
were
again,
asking
limitations
that, yeah.
on funding and actual space
Yes.
and time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to kind of quickly add to that, I believe that the state should give artists basic pay, and artists shouldn't really have to think too much about their own existence, so they can focus and concentrate their energies in making things and writing beautiful texts, for example. Many artists work for 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and then they are drained, and it's so difficult to work just during evenings and in the weekends. It's very important for an artist to have this economic safe space, because it's also mental. Mm-hmm. From my own, like when I have money, it's not that I have money to spend it. It just makes me feel good in my head. Like
and is that because
I
it
have
gives
money,
you
there's money. I feel more confident.
Yep.
I go about, feeling better about myself.
And
with
is that the money
smile
itself,
on my face,
or
yeah.
is it that having the money gives you more, I guess, freedom to be able to work as an artist?
Yes, because then, yes, of course, also that, because then you don't have to yield to the demands of certain ideologies and certain trends which come with institutions, who are run by certain ideologies of parties and professional politicians, or sponsors and those who give. For example, if I was going to fund an NGO, and if they were going to go against my own ideology, I'd probably stop funding them.
Yeah, and that's about gatekeepers and control.
And then, of course, there are gatekeepers as well. I mean, gatekeepers suck. But, gatekeepers are there. It's good to make friends with gatekeepers, because gatekeepers
but it's sad that we
are
have
very,
to, as
very,
artists,
very
in
important.
some,
It's like a curve. So there is the institution, and then the artist, and then the curve goes like this, and the gatekeeper is up here. So the gatekeeper is really important, and you have to pass the gatekeeper, like in the door of the law in Kafka, short story, for example. But going back to meditation, I love meditation. I meditate myself. I think it's very important to meditate. But then I realize when I meditate, I don't feel like doing art, or I just want to wash dishes, or go out in the park and look at the birds, and trees seem to speak to me, like the world opens. People come and give you compliments for no reason, but then, you just don't want to write poetry. It's like you become a poem. And,
but that's beautiful. You become a poem.
Become a poem, Genc, please.
Which is something that I'd rather not. I'd rather be outside and play with language. And I have also this acronym. It's TAT, TAT. Yeah, it's translation, adaptation, transformation. And I believe that the experiencing of reality, cognition itself is a tendency to translate. We translate all the time the reality around us, faces, words, etc., etc.
Or our inner experience. So translation doesn't tell you what you translate. Like, you give it a meaning.
Yes.
Sorry to.
No, that's good.
Yes, but I only discovered this working with texts when I was translating stuff from English to Albanian, or the other way around. Things would transform, and then other things would fall down, and then new things would appear. So the creation process, we might call it like that, because to create seems like a big word, like you're a god, and it occurs in a process of translation. So I'm really into translating and transforming.
And that's that can be
because
a whole
to
new
translate
process.
Somehow is to transform.
I'm going to start. That's a nice. To translate is to transform is a nice point to finish on, because we're nearly out of time. Hopefully we can continue this discussion outside a bar at some point. Thank you, everybody. It's been really interesting. Personally, I've taken from this that artists need space to, in order to properly explore without the kind of confines of what culture and society has put on us, to meditate, to think, to have space within the context of the reality that we need to live, we need to eat, we need time time and money, which I know sometimes they're related. Like you say, if you have money, you have time to wander and to meditate. It's imperfect. We're working as artists within an imperfect situation, and trying to play and understand and communicate within that kind of, within a society that does exist, at the same time as trying to find ourselves within that and each other. Thank you for being here, and I hope that this discussion can continue. Thank you.